The crystalline starship, Inevitable Harmony, trembled as Commander Vrask slammed his primary appendage against the command console. 6 amber eyes narrowed into slits as he watched the recording for the 19th time. A single human female, standing alone before the assembled Galactic Council. "You have destroyed our colonies," Ambassador Elira Kazan said, her voice never rising above a whisper. "You have determined humanity to be too dangerous, too unpredictable to join your perfect union of worlds." The recording zoomed closer. The Council representatives from 17 dominant species watched impassively as she continued. 3 billion human lives, gone, because you feared what we might become. That's when it happened. The moment that haunted Vrask's dreams. A single tear formed in the human's left eye and traced a path down her cheek. "Mark this moment," she said. "One human tear. It is all we will shed for what comes next." Then she had simply walked away. 2 solar cycles later, the Procyon system vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. 5 billion Menkai citizens and an entire star system gone as if they had never existed. Quantum scientists declared it theoretically impossible. 1 week later, it was the Draconis outpost. Then the hegemony's primary shipyard at Tau Ceti. Now Vrask's ship raced toward the emergency council session, carrying data that no one wanted to believe. "Commander," his science officer Nylith called, her translucent fins rippling with anxiety. "Analysis confirms it. The humans aren't using weapons. They're using mathematics." Vrask's exoskeleton clicked as he turned. "Explain." Each human military vessel carries what appears to be a simple equation engine. When activated, it solves an unsolvable equation, forcing a localized breakdown in universal constants. That's impossible? Yes, but they've done it. They've weaponized paradox itself. The tactical display flickered, showing the human fleet's progress. 73 small vessels heading toward the heart of Council space. Unstoppable because they weren't fighting. They were simply rewriting reality around their targets. "Commander, incoming transmission," the communications officer announced. It's Ambassador Kazan." Her image appeared on the main view screen, still wearing the same simple gray uniform from the council meeting. She wasn't smiling. Humans seldom did, Vrask had learned, when they were at their most dangerous. "Commander Vrask," she acknowledged, "I've been instructed to offer you one opportunity." To surrender? Vrask's mandibles clicked in what his species considered bitter humor. No, to witness. She gestured, and the view changed, showing a stellar cartography of council space. Each point of light represents a world that ordered or supported the attack on human colonies. Thousands of stars illuminated the screen. "We have no desire for indiscriminate slaughter," Kazan continued. "Unlike the Council, we distinguish between governments and their citizens. But every being who sanctioned our extinction will face judgment." Vrask felt his heart constrict. "You can't possibly have the resources to—" "We don't need resources, Commander. Only proof and patience. The universe itself will correct this injustice." Her eyes, so alien in their unblinking intensity, held his gaze. "One tear, Commander. Remember that when you address the Council. One tear was all humanity would shed. Not because we lack emotion, but because we knew what justice requires." The transmission ended. Vrask turned to his second-in-command. "Maximum velocity to the Council chambers. We must convince them to negotiate." "Will the humans accept peace?" his officer asked. Vrask remembered the tear. One single human tear, not of sadness, he now understood, but of determination. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if they don't, I fear no one will be spared." The Grand Council chamber on Nexus Prime had never contained so many high-ranking officials. 72 species represented, their most powerful leaders crammed into emergency seats, surrounded by harried aides who whispered urgent updates. Supreme Counselor Ezovia, her silver-scaled body draped in ceremonial governance robes, called for order as Commander Vrask concluded his report. "Impossible," declared Fleet Marshal Oroxus, his carapace flushed deep crimson with agitation. "No species could develop technology to destabilize universal constants." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Vrask replied. 3 star systems have simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, erased, as if they never were. The holographic display at the chamber's center showed the approaching human fleet, now just 53 vessels. 20 had broken formation hours ago, destinations unknown. "We've underestimated them," said Liaison Catra, the insectoid representative of the Science Directorate. "When we assessed humanity a century ago, they were primitive, barely capable of interplanetary travel. Yet in just 100 revolutions, they mastered faster-than-light travel, quantum manipulation, and now," Ezovia gestured at the display, "this abomination of physics." The doors to the chamber hissed open. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly as Ambassador Kazan entered, flanked by 2 humans in simple gray uniforms. No weapons were visible, yet not a single security officer moved to intercept them. "How did you penetrate our defenses?" demanded Oroxus. "The same way we've done everything else you thought impossible," Kazan replied. Her companions, a copper-skinned male with unusual violet eyes and a tall female with intricate patterns shaved into her silver hair, remained silent. "I am Magister Reese," the male finally spoke, "Chief Mathematician of the Human Retribution Fleet." "And I am Architect Niara," said the female. "We are here to explain the terms of judgment." Ezovia rose to her full height. "The Council does not recognize your authority to judge." 3 billion humans," interrupted Kazan. Her voice remained eerily calm. "Children, elders, poets, farmers, dreaming minds, all extinguished because this council deemed our potential too threatening." Niara stepped forward, activating a small device. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy materialized, with pulsing red markers scattered throughout. "These are the coordinates where our equation engines are now positioned," she explained. "Each is capable of removing from existence any entity we designate." "Impossible," Cathra chittered. "Matter cannot simply be—" "It's not the matter we target," Reese interjected. "It's the mathematical probability of existence itself. We've discovered that reality is, fundamentally, a question of observation and probability. Change the equation, change existence." An uncomfortable silence fell across the chamber. "What do you want?" Ezovia finally asked. "Justice," Kazan said simply. "Every individual who voted for or executed the strike against our colonies will face removal from the universal equation." Counselor Dalar, representative of the ancient Vrexil, rose shakily on his anti-gravity platform. "You speak of trillions of beings. Many followed orders, believing they preserved galactic peace." "We've been very precise in our calculations," Niara replied. "Only those with genuine moral culpability will face judgment." "And if we resist?" challenged Oroxus. Reese smiled thinly. "You already have. The defense fleet that attempted to intercept us near the Cygnus Gate? They no longer exist in any timeline. Not destroyed, simply never born." Horrified murmurs swept through the chamber. "You cannot play God," Ezovia hissed. "No more than you did when you condemned our species," Kazan countered. "The difference is our justice is surgical. We take only those who chose genocide." Commander Vrask moved forward, mandibles clicking anxiously. "What of those who opposed the action? Who voted against the strike?" For the first time, Kazan's expression softened slightly. "They have nothing to fear. In fact, they will be crucial in building what comes after." "After?" Dalar questioned. "After. Humanity demonstrates that no species, no matter how ancient, how powerful, can commit atrocities without consequence," Reese explained. The judgment begins in 12 hours. We recommend you use that time wisely." The three humans turned to leave. "Wait!" called Azovia desperately. "There must be another way." Kazan paused at the threshold and looked back. "There was. Before you crossed the line that can never be uncrossed. Before you taught us that the only language the galaxy respects is devastating power." A single tear formed in her eye, but did not fall. "One tear was all we promised. The rest is justice." Panic spread across 17,000 worlds as news of the impending judgment leaked beyond the council chambers. Despite communications blackouts and desperate propaganda, the truth could not be contained. The humans were coming to collect their due. In the orbital command center above Nexus Prime, Admiral Lorath watched the sensor feeds with increasing desperation. Once commander of the galaxy's largest battle fleet, he now presided over chaos. A third of his captains had deserted, fleeing to distant territories. Others had surrendered directly to human vessels, begging for clemency. "Status of the Bastion defense grid?" he demanded. "Functional but unreliable, sir," replied his tactical officer, Specialist Pelax. "Systems are fluctuating, as if the underlying mathematical constants are shifting." Lorath's dorsal spines flattened against his back, a physiological sign of extreme stress in his species. "And the equation counters?" "Failed, sir. Our scientists cannot comprehend the fundamental principles behind the human technology. It's as though they're operating with an entirely different understanding of physics." The Admiral stared at the tactical display. The human fleet had separated further, individual vessels taking positions at strategic locations throughout Council space. They weren't attacking, merely waiting. A priority alert flashed on his console. Incoming transmission from the surface. "Admiral." Supreme Counselor Azovia's face appeared, her scales now a sickly gray. "They've begun." "Begun?" "But they said 12 hours. Not the erasures," Azovia clarified. "The revelations. They've somehow accessed our secure archives and are broadcasting the Council's deliberations from 70 cycles ago. The actual orders for the human extinction, names, votes, everything." Lorath felt ice spread through his circulatory system. He had been there, advocating for the preemptive strike. His name would be on those records. "The public is reacting," Azovia continued. "Riots on 47 worlds. The Confederation of Outer Colonies has already declared independence and denounced the Council. The Meridian Republic is offering sanctuary to any Council official who publicly repudiates the extinction order. They're fragmenting the alliance," Lorath realized. "Dividing us before they strike." "It's worse," Azovia whispered. "They're turning us against ourselves." On the planet's surface, Ambassador Kazan and her companions had established themselves in an abandoned temple complex. They made no effort to hide, transmitted no threats. They simply waited while the truth did its work. Inside the temple, Niara monitored the cascading social upheaval across Council space. "It's proceeding faster than we anticipated. The Vrexil populations are particularly vocal in their condemnation." "They would be," Reese noted. "Their philosophy has always emphasized individual moral responsibility. The idea that their leaders authorized genocide without public knowledge violates their deepest ethical principles." Kazan stood at the ancient window, watching distant smoke rise from government buildings. "And the targeting calculations?" "Complete," Reese confirmed. 218,943 individuals bear direct responsibility. The equation engines are calibrated for their specific quantum signatures, and the innocents will remain untouched, as promised. Niara approached with a data tablet. "Though some collateral psychological trauma is inevitable, many will lose parents, leaders, mentors, without understanding why they ceased to exist." Kazan nodded slowly. a mercy compared to what we suffered. A soft alert chimed. A delegation approached the temple, not military but civilians from various council worlds. At their head walked Commander Vrask, having shed his military insignia. They request an audience, Nyara reported. Grant it, Kazan decided. Minutes later, Vrask and 7 representatives stood before the humans. Their postures displayed various cultural indicators of contrition. Lowered eye stalks, exposed throat sacs, retracted claws. Ambassador, Vrask began, we come not as council representatives, but as citizens. We propose an alternative to your judgment. Speak, Kazan permitted. Public trials. Let the guilty face justice before the species they betrayed, both yours and their own. Let the proceedings be broadcast across all territories so that such crimes can never again be hidden. You fear our judgment, Nyara observed. We fear its invisibility, countered a Meridian philosopher named Genax. If the guilty simply vanish, the lesson may be lost. But if they stand trial, if they must answer for their decisions, the galaxy will never forget. Kazan exchanged glances with her companions. Your proposal has merit, but how can we trust the Council to implement true justice? Not the Council, Vrask said firmly. An independent tribunal with representatives from all affected parties, including humanity. For several heartbeats, Kazan remained silent. Then she activated her communication device. Equation fleet, hold position. Judgment parameters under revision. The revolution had begun, not with destruction, but with truth. The Great Tribunal convened on neutral territory, a massive space station constructed in orbit around a dormant star. Representatives from every affected civilization occupied tiered observation decks, while the accused sat in transparent containment fields at the chamber's center. Supreme Justice Elara Voss, a human with obsidian skin and silver-threaded hair, presided over the proceedings. Selected for her unimpeachable record in interstellar law, she had spent the last 40 years documenting crimes against sentient beings. This tribunal will set precedent for all galactic civilizations, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. The accused faced charges of genocide, conspiracy, and violations of fundamental sentient rights. In the testimony chamber, Reese presented evidence with mathematical precision, casualty figures, probability calculations of survival if the colonies had been evacuated rather than annihilated, alternative scenarios that council leadership had rejected. The decision to eradicate human settlement wasn't made in desperate crisis, he explained, displaying internal council communications. It was calculated over 17 years of secret deliberation. Former Fleet Marshal Oroxis, now stripped of rank and confined to a mobility unit that suppressed his natural aggression pheromones, chittered defiantly. Humanity represented an existential threat. Our predictive models showed a 78.3% probability that humans would achieve galactic dominance within 3 centuries. And this justified genocide? Justice Voss inquired. Preemptive action was necessary. Their adaptability, their capacity for violence, their potential, interrupted Nyara, who stood as the human scientific expert. You feared not what humanity was, but what we might become. You condemned us not for crimes committed, but for crimes you imagined we would someday commit. On the observation deck, Commander Vrask sat beside Ambassador Kazan. No longer adversaries. They had spent months collaborating on the tribunal structure. Your patience surprises me, Vrask admitted quietly. Your people possess the power to erase the guilty from existence, yet you endure this lengthy process. Justice without understanding is merely vengeance, Kazan replied, and vengeance alone cannot rebuild. Throughout the station, Billions across the galaxy watched the proceedings via quantum entanglement broadcasts. On thousands of worlds, public squares were filled with citizens bearing witness. Schools suspended regular instruction so youth could observe history unfolding. In the tribunal chamber, a succession of council officials offered excuses, justifications, and occasionally, remorse. "We believed ourselves enlightened," former Councilor Azovia testified, her scales now permanently faded to ashen gray. "We thought our advancement gave us the wisdom to determine which species deserved to evolve and which posed too great a risk." "And how do you view that belief now?" Justice Voss asked. "As the most dangerous form of arrogance," Azovia replied, voice barely audible. "We became the very monsters we feared humanity might become." The proceedings extended beyond individuals to institutional failures. The Galactic Scientific Authority was indicted for ethical violations in their species assessment protocols. The Council's military directorate faced scrutiny for developing planet-killer weapons under the guise of defensive measures. During a recess, Kazan received an urgent message from Earth. The human government was fracturing over the tribunal. Some factions demanded immediate execution of the guilty. Others called for mercy to demonstrate human moral superiority. "They don't understand," she confided to Niara. "This isn't about vengeance or moral posturing. It's about establishing a new foundation." "The equation engines remain operational," Niara reminded her. "The original judgment could still be implemented." Kazan gazed across the chamber at the accused, once the galaxy's most powerful beings, now diminished figures awaiting their fate. "No," she decided, "the mathematics of justice are more complex than simple erasure. The galaxy must remember this moment." As the tribunal reconvened, Justice Voss called for final submissions. Representatives from the devastated human colonies presented testimony, holographic records salvaged from orbital databanks showing the final moments before annihilation, children playing, scientists working, ordinary lives extinguished without warning. The chamber fell silent as the last recording played, a kindergarten teacher reading to a circle of children when the sky turned white. Justice Voss turned to Kazan. "As the official representative of humanity, you may address the tribunal before verdicts are rendered." Kazan stood, feeling the weight of billions of human and alien eyes upon her. "When I stood before the council and shed a single tear, it represented humanity's determination to obtain justice. Today, I understand it represents something more, the fine line between justice and vengeance that all sentient beings must navigate." She gazed at the accused. "You will be judged, but in judging you, we also judge ourselves and the civilization we will build from these ashes." The verdicts came over 7 exhausting days. 214 individual judgments, each meticulously documented and broadcast across the galaxy. The penalties varied, some permanent exile to isolated worlds, others sentenced to spend their remaining lives restoring devastated ecosystems on abandoned planets. The highest-ranking conspirators received the most severe punishment, quantum consciousness imprisonment, their minds preserved in isolation fields where they would experience nothing but the final moments of the human colonies they had destroyed, looped for subjective centuries. No death penalties were issued, a controversial decision that sparked protests on surviving human worlds. "Death is too simple," Justice Voss explained when announcing the sentences. "It ends accountability rather than extending it. These individuals will serve as living reminders of where unchecked power leads." After the final verdict, Ambassador Kazan authorized the most controversial aspect of humanity's response, the systematic dismantling of the equation engines. Each vessel housing the reality-altering technology was ceremonially deactivated, its core components separated and entrusted to different civilizations. "Too dangerous to exist," declared the newly formed Galactic Assembly, which had replaced the discredited Council. "No single species should wield such power." On a terraformed moon orbiting Jupiter, Kazan stood in a memorial garden planted where the first equation engine had been conceived. Crystalline monuments captured the faces of the lost colonists, 3 billion souls represented through algorithm-generated images based on genetic archives. Magister Reese approached, looking older than his 52 years. "The Vrexil delegation has arrived. They're requesting your presence at the Reconciliation Summit." Kazan nodded, her fingers tracing the engraved name of a child on the nearest monument. "Do you think we made the right choice? Sharing the technology instead of using it? You mean, do I think we should have carried out the erasures as planned?" Reese considered the question carefully. Mathematically speaking, it would have been more efficient. But ethically? "Ethics isn't my specialty," he admitted. "But I believe invisible justice serves no purpose. The guilty disappearing without explanation would have left a void. This way, the galaxy witnessed, participated, and transformed." Commander Vrask, now Ambassador Vrask of the Reformed Territories, joined them. His exoskeleton had molted too, the deep indigo of his species' wisdom phase. "The Assembly has ratified the Kazan Protocols," he announced. "No preemptive action against any sentient species will ever again be permitted. Additionally, the mandatory sharing of technological advancements between member worlds has been codified into interstellar law." "Will it be enough?" Kazan wondered aloud. "Nothing is ever enough to balance such loss," Vrask acknowledged. "But it's a foundation." The three walked through the memorial garden toward the waiting diplomatic shuttle. Around them, visitors from dozens of worlds moved quietly between the monuments, many leaving tokens of remembrance, a practice they had adopted from human custom. "The Meridian philosopher was right," Niara observed, meeting them at the shuttle. "Public justice has created lasting change. 17 former council worlds have completely restructured their governments. The hegemony has opened its archived records of previous species interventions. The collective has established reparation funds for displaced populations. And yet," Kazan noted, "some human factions still call for activating the remaining equation engine." The final engine, kept under guard on a classified location, remained operational. A deliberate decision, a lingering warning to the galaxy that humanity retained the ultimate sanction. "A deterrent," Reese suggested. "Its existence alone ensures compliance." "Perhaps," Kazan said doubtfully. "Or perhaps it ensures fear will always underlie our relationships with other species." As their shuttle lifted from the memorial, Kazan gazed down at the sprawling crystal monument. From orbit, the pattern became clear. The monuments formed a single human eye, with a teardrop path winding through its center. "One tear," she murmured. "We promised one tear." "Ambassador?" Vrask inquired. "I was remembering my words to the council. One human tear. It is all we will shed for what comes next." "I meant it as a threat. Now I wonder if it could become a promise of a different kind." "What kind of promise?" asked Niara. Kazan looked at her companions, human and alien, united. "By a painful history, but working toward a different future. That humanity need never again shed tears of vengeance. That one was enough. 50 years after the Great Tribunal, humanity had integrated itself fully into the galactic community. The way, equation engine technology, though never again weaponized, had revolutionized physics, medicine, and interstellar travel. The principle that reality operated on mathematical probability rather than fixed constants had opened new frontiers of scientific understanding. On the anniversary of the Tribunal's conclusion, an unprecedented gathering took place on Earth. Representatives from every known sentient species, over 300 distinct civilizations, convened at the newly constructed Nexus of Remembrance in what had once been the Sahara Desert. At the center stood the perpetual flame, a chi, quantum fire that burned simultaneously in memorial sites on every world that had lost citizens, either in the original attack on human colonies or in the subsequent upheaval. Elira Kazan, now in her 9th decade but still serving as humanity's principal diplomat, stood before the assembled multitudes. Her once dark hair had turned pure white, her face lined with the wisdom and sorrow of one who had witnessed both the worst and best of sentient nature. 50 years ago, she began, her voice carried across the vast gathering by harmonic amplifiers. We stood at a precipice. Humanity possessed the power to erase our enemies from existence itself. Our grief and rage nearly drove us to use that power without restraint. The crowd remained silent. Representatives from worlds that had once feared humanity now listening, with respectful attention. But true strength, she continued, lies not in wielding power, but in choosing when to withhold it, in finding the courage to seek justice rather than vengeance, in shedding one tear instead of oceans of blood. From her position at the edge of the gathering, Nyara, now director of the Interspecies Scientific Cooperative, observed the diverse assembly with satisfaction. Species that had spent millennia in isolation or conflict now stood side by side. The Vrexil elders conversed with human philosophers. Menkai engineers demonstrated adaptive technology to fascinated hegemony scholars. Quite the legacy you've built, remarked a familiar voice. Nyara turned to find Vrask beside her. Though well into his final life phase, the former commander retained his keen observational skills. He now headed the Galactic Historical Authority, dedicated to preserving accurate records of interspecies, conflicts, and reconciliations. Not my legacy, she corrected. Ours, all of us who chose a different path. At the podium, Kazan concluded her address by activating a holographic display that encircled the entire gathering. It showed the faces of those lost in the colony attacks, humans who never lived to see this day of reconciliation. We remember them not to fuel hatred, but to remind ourselves of the cost of fear, Kazan declared. Their memory has built a galaxy where such atrocities cannot happen again. As the ceremony concluded, delegates moved toward the Revelation Chamber, a massive underground complex where the final equation engine would be ceremonially decommissioned. After 50 years as a silent deterrent, the Assembly had unanimously voted for its dismantling. Reese, who had overseen the engine's maintenance throughout the decades, met Kazan at the chamber entrance. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "Some would argue we should maintain this safeguard. A weapon held in reserve is a weapon still contemplated. For use," she replied. "We cannot build trust while maintaining the capacity for ultimate retribution." Together they descended to the chamber's heart, where the equation engine, a deceptively simple apparatus of crystalline matrices and quantum resonators, hummed with potential power. Representatives from 17 key civilizations joined them, each assigned to remove and secure a critical component. The disassembly would ensure no single species could ever rebuild the technology without broad cooperation. "Before we proceed," announced Kazan, "there is one final calculation to be performed." Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembly. "Not erasure," she clarified, "but remembrance." At her signal, Reese activated a modified version of the engine's core functions. Instead of targeting individuals for removal from reality, it created a quantum mnemonic field, a permanent mathematical constant embedded into the universe itself. "This field will ensure that the memory of what happened can never be erased," Reese explained. "Not through time, not through political revision, not through deliberate forgetting. The mathematics of memory are now fundamental to reality itself." As the engine completed its final calculation, a subtle wave of awareness spread outward at the speed of thought. Across the galaxy, sentient beings experienced a moment of collective remembrance, not traumatic, but clarifying. A shared understanding that some boundaries, once crossed, transformed entire civilizations. The disassembly proceeded with solemn precision. When the final component was removed, rendering the technology forever inert, Kazan placed her hand on the empty housing. From quantum mathematics, we learned that observation changes reality, she said. From this conflict, we learned that memory changes civilization. Later, as delegates departed Earth for their home worlds, Kazan stood with her oldest companions watching the ships rise like stars into the evening sky. "Was it worth it?" asked Reese. "All of it?" "Which part?" Kazan countered. "The restraint, choosing justice over vengeance, the decades of rebuilding trust." Kazan considered the question as she watched the departing vessels, each carrying representatives of species that might have been erased from existence had humanity chosen differently. "Ask me again in another 50 years, she said, with a hint of her old determination. "But I believe we've proven something profound about humanity and about all sentient life." "What's that?" Niara inquired. "That evolution favors not just the strongest or the most ruthless, but ultimately those wise enough to recognize when power should remain unleashed." As night fell fully over the nexus of remembrance, the perpetual flame cast its light across the gathered figures, human and alien alike, united by a shared commitment born from history's darkest moment. "One tear was enough," Kazan whispered. "One tear to warn the galaxy. One tear to change the course of history. One tear to remind us all of what we might become, both the worst and the best." Behind them, engraved on the memorial's central monument, gleamed the words that had become the founding principle of the new galactic order. From one human tear came understanding. No one will be spared the responsibility of justice. No one will be denied the possibility of redemption.